Good day, everyone. My name is Mary Jean J. Pandao, and today I will be reporting the Republic Act 11469, also known as Bayanihan to Heal as One Act, and Republic Act 11494, also known as Bayanihan to Recover as One Act. These acts promulgated by the Congress in view of the serious health threats and disruptions posed by COVID-19 on the lives and livelihoods of the people and the economy as a whole. In fact, the World Health Organization has already characterized COVID-19 as a pandemic and called on all countries to take urgent and aggressive action to mitigate or prevent its spread. The act comes in the wake of initial measures already taken by the President to address the COVID-19 situations with the issuance of Proclamation 922, declaring a state of public health emergency throughout the Philippines, and Proclamation 929 declaring a state of calamity throughout the Philippines and imposing an enhanced community quarantine throughout Luzon. Does the promulgation of the act have a constitutional basis? Yes, the temporary emergency powers of the President are constitutional when obtained by legislative enactment, especially to allow the executive branch of government to better address a particular threat facing the country and its people by means of a declared national policy. The 1987 Constitution, Article 6, Section 23, provides that in times of war or other national emergencies, the Congress may, by law, authorize the President for a limited period and subject to such restrictions as it may prescribe, to exercise powers necessary and proper to carry out a declared national policy. Good day, everyone. Before I start with my first report, let's just watch this short video clip on what really COVID-19 is all about and how this pandemic started. Before
na ng banta ng COVID-19 sa ating bansa, mahalaga ang kooperasyon ng bawat isa. Ang pananatili sa loob ng bahay ay isa sa pinakasimple pero pinaka-epektibong paraan para hindi kumalat ang virus. Kunwari, ikaw ang tuldok na ito. Malusog ka at malakas. Lumabas ka ng bahay. Ang hindi mo alam, may nakasalamuha ka ng may COVID-19. Tandaan, mahirap malaman kung sino ang may virus, pero madali itong maipasa sa iba. Pwedeng naipasa na pala niya ang virus sa iyo nung umubo siya o bumahin. O baka naman ay nahawa na dahil humawa kayo sa parehong bagay na kontaminado. Ngayon ay mayroon ka na rin COVID-19. Isa ka ng carrier na makakahawa sa iba. Dahil maaaring ilang araw pa bago lumitaw ang sintomas na ubo, sipon, hirap sa paghinga at lagnat. Pwede ring wala kang nararamdamang sintomas, ngunit nakakahawa ka pa rin. Pag-uwi mo sa bahay, maaari mong mahawahan ang iyong pamilya. Kasama na rito ang lolo at lola mo o ang mga magulang mo na may edad. Sila ang may pinakamahina na depensa laban sa virus. Ang mga may sakit sa puso, diabetes, high blood, at iba pang pre-existing conditions at mga buntis, mahina ang panlaban sa COVID-19. Kapag na-infect ang taong mahina ang immune system, posibleng magkaroon siya ng malalang karamdaman at kailanganing dalhin sa ospital. Sa patuloy na paglabas ng bahay at pagpunta sa pampublikong lugar, tinatayang maaari kang makahawa ng 3 pang tao at sila makakahawa ng mas marami pang iba. 20% ng mga nahawa ay maaaring maospital at dadami ng dadami ito habang mas kumakalat pa ang virus. Bukod sa dumaraming COVID-19 patients, marami pang ibang may sakit ang nasa mga pagamutan. Ang mga pasyenteng malubhang-malubha na ang karamdaman, hindi na maaasikaso. Wala ring lugar para sa mga pasyenteng may ibang karamdaman. Kaya nating iwasan ang patuloy na pagkalat ng COVID-19 kung iisipin natin ang kapakanan ng iba. Kailangan nating isipin at kumilos na parang bitbit na natin ang virus para hindi ito kumalat pa sa iba. Sundin ang social distancing. At hanggat maaari, manatili sa loob ng bahay. Kung talagang kinakailangang lumabas, panatilihin ang 1 metrong layo sa ibang tao. Maging malinis din sa katawan at sa kapaligiran. Parating maghugas ng kamay gamit ang sabon at tubig. At i-disinfect ang mga bagay na madalas hinahawakan. Ang mahalaga, mapabagal natin ang pagkalat ng COVID-19 para mas kakaunti ang mga kailangang magpa-ospital at mabawasan ang mga Pilipinong magkakasakit. Magiging epektibo lamang ito kung mananatili tayo sa bahay, sundin ang social distancing. Isang maliit na sakripisyo para sa buhay ng kapwa nating Pilipino. Tulong-tulong tayo. Let's beat COVID-19!
According to Salvador S. Panelo, the Chief Presidential Legal Counsel and Presidential Spokesperson, there is an urgent need to implement measures that will help address the health scare brought about the spread of COVID-19 in our land. They include the effective detection of the virus among the populace, prompt testing by health facilities of patients, protections and access to transportation in favor of our health workers who are at the front line of this battle, maintenance of availability and pricing of essential and basic commodities for consumers, and provision thereof to those belonging to the vulnerable sectors of society, among others. Republic Act number 11469, also known as Bayanihan to Heal as One Act, was signed into law on March 23, 2020. The Act specifies that it will be in full force and effect for a period of 3 months unless extended by Congress or withdrawn sooner by means of concurrent resolution of Congress or ended by presidential proclamation. However, in the event that Congress decides to extend the effectivity of the Act, the 1987 Constitution provides that such emergency powers cannot go beyond the next adjournment of Congress, as prescribed in Article 6, Section 23, which in the case of current 18th Congress ends by 2023. Section 2, State of National Emergency. Presidential Proclamation number 922 series of 2020 was issued declaring a state of public health emergency throughout the Philippines due to the coronavirus disease 2019, and the code alert system of COVID-19 was raised to code red sub-level 2 in accordance with the recommendation of the Department of Health and Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases. Further, Presidential Proclamation number 929 series of 2020 was issued declaring a state of calamity throughout the Philippines and imposed enhanced community quarantine throughout Luzon. The Act is directed at addressing the public health emergency caused by COVID-19. The ultimate goal is to protect and promote the welfare of the people. Section 3 of this Act enumerates the government's specific goals as follows. First is mitigate and contain the transmission of COVID-19. Second is immediately mobilize assistance for the provision of basic necessities to families and individuals affected by the enhanced community quarantine, especially the poor. Third is undertake measures to prevent the overburdening of the country's healthcare system. The fourth one is immediately provide ample healthcare, including medical tests and treatments to COVID-19 patients, persons under investigations, and persons under monitoring. Next is undertake a recovery and rehabilitation program as well as social amelioration program and other social safety nets to all affected sectors. Next one is ensure adequate, sufficient, and readily available funds to undertake the above stated measures and programs. Next is partner with the private sector and other stakeholders in the quick and efficient delivery of these measures and programs. And last one is to promote and protect the collective interests of all Filipinos. Section 4, Authorized Powers. Pursuant to Article 4, Section 23, Paragraph 2 of the Constitution, the President is hereby authorized to exercise powers that are necessary and proper to carry out the declared national policy. The President shall have the power to adopt the following temporary emergency measures to respond to crisis brought by the pandemic. Under the Act, the President is authorized to follow, adopt, and implement the guidelines and best practices of the World Health Organization in dealing with COVID-19, especially in the areas of education, detention, protection, and treatment. In addition, the Act also authorized the President to expedite and streamline the accreditation of testing kits as well as facilitate the prompt testing of PUIs and PUMs by both public and private healthcare institutions and provide for the immediate isolation and treatment of confirmed COVID-19 patients, provided that the cost of treatment for COVID-19 patients shall be covered under the National Health Insurance Program of the Philippines, Insurance Corporations, or PhilHealth. For health workers' benefits under this Act, special risk allowance for private and public health workers in addition to their hazard pay under the Magna Carta of Public Health Workers or Republic Act number 7305, and in the event of their exposure to COVID-19 or any work-related injury or disease experienced by public and private health workers for the duration of the emergency, PhilHealth is to be directed by the President to shoulder all their medical expenses. And this act also provides that in every public and private health worker who contracts severe COVID-19 infection while in the line of duty is to be provided with a one-time compensation in the amount of 100,000 pesos, and the surviving families of public and private health workers who may die while fighting the COVID-19 pandemic are to be awarded 1 million compensation. Both forms of compensation for all health workers are to be applied retroactively from February 1, 2020. For local government units' responsibilities under this Act, first, that ensure that all local governments act within the letter and spirit of and are cooperating fully with the directives and regulations of the national government specific to the implementation of the enhanced community quarantine to address the COVID-19 emergency. However, local governments are allowed to exercise autonomy in matters undefined by the national government, although the actions to be taken by local governments must still be within the parameters set by the national authorities. And in order to effectively execute the terms of the enhanced community quarantine, local governments are also authorized by the Act to use more than 5% of their calamity funds subject to additional funding from the national government. For general public benefits under this Act, provide a social amelioration package to those who are suffering the most from the enhanced community quarantine, especially the poor and those with barely any resources or savings to draw from. Low-income households are to receive an emergency monthly subsidy from 5,000 to 8,000 pesos depending on regional minimum wage rates and taking into account subsidies received from conditional cash transfer and rice subsidy programs. Note that the Act specified that this emergency monthly subsidy is to be given only to around 18 million low-income households. Another general public benefit is to ensure the availability of credit to the productive sector of the economy, especially in the countryside, through measures such as, but not limited to, lowering the effective lending rates of interest and reserve requirements of lending institutions. The Act also provides that the President ensures the availability of essential goods and services, including food and medicines, to the people by adopting reasonably necessary measures to facilitate the movement of such goods and services, as well as minimize supply chain disruptions to the maximum extent possible. In order to ensure the speedy movement and distribution of such essential goods and services, the government, specifically the DILG in coordination with the LGU, will make sure that encroachments and other obstacles to traffic in all roads, including illegal constructions in public places, are removed. Likewise authorized to move statutory deadlines and timelines for the filing of official documents, payments of taxes, and other fees required by law beyond the quarantine period. Other special temporary powers given to the President under this Act: the President direct the operation of private establishments, including hospitals, transportations, and among others, to serve as quarantine areas or as medical relief and aid distribution locations or other temporary medical facilities, including the transportation of and temporary accommodations for health emergency personnel. The management of such private establishments are to be retained in the hands of their owners, but the owners are required to provide a full accounting to the President of their operations, including additional costs and damages incurred as the basis for their reasonable compensation. Provided, finally, that if the foregoing enterprises unjustifiably refuse or signify that they are no longer capable of operating their enterprises for the purpose stated herein, the President may take over their operations subject to the limits and safeguards enshrined in the Constitution. The Human Resource for Health will hire temporary health personnel to augment the current health workforce and provide them with government hazard duty pay. And this act also authorized the President to enforce measures to protect the people from hoarding, profiteering, price manipulation, product deceptions, monopolies, or other pernicious practices that affect the supply, distribution, and movement of food, clothing, hygiene and sanitation products, medicines and medical supplies, fuels, and other articles of prime necessity, whether imported or locally produced or manufactured. Importers and manufacturers of medical and healthcare equipment, which are critical to the COVID-19 response, are given liberal grant of incentives, including exemption from import duties, taxes, and other fees. The President is also given the power to temporarily require businesses to prioritize and accept contracts for materials and services necessary in the fight against COVID-19, subject to fair and reasonable terms. The President can also regulate and limit the operation of all transportations in land, sea, and air, whether private or public, in a manner that will allow the government to address the COVID-19 health emergency. The President will continue to authorize alternative working arrangement for employees and workers in government as well as the private sector to conform with the enhanced community quarantine and other measures to address the COVID-19 national health emergency, and temporarily require businesses to prioritize and accept contracts for materials and services necessary in the fight against COVID-19, subject to fair and reasonable terms. The President can also regulate and limit the operation of all transportation, land, sea, and air, whether private or public, in a manner that will allow the government address the COVID-19 health emergency. and undertake measures to conserve and regulate the distribution and use of power, fuel, energy, and water to ensure an adequate supply of such necessities for the duration of the national health emergency. The banks and other financial institutions, both public and private, including GSIS, SSS, and Pag-ibig Fund, are directly by the President to issue a 30-day extension for the payment of all loans, as well as credit card payments falling due within the quarantine period without incurring interest, penalties, or other charges, and a similar 30-day extension is provided for the payment of residential rents falling due within the quarantine period. And persons with multiple loans shall likewise be given the minimum 30-day grace period for every loan. This act allows donation to be made to the government's efforts to address the COVID-19 emergency, but does not apply to health products that do not require clearance or certifications from the Food and Drug Administration or FDA. Thus, the act punish those who violate its provisions. Under Section 6 penalties of this act, the answer is yes. In addition to acts or omissions already penalized by existing laws, the following offenses shall be punishable with imprisonment of 2 months or a fine of not less than 10,000 pesos but not more than 1 million pesos, or both such imprisonment and fine at the discretion of the court. Those violators are the following: LGU officials disobeying national government policies or directives in imposing quarantines, and those owners of privately owned hospitals, medical and health facilities, including passenger vessels and other establishments who unjustifiably refuse to operate pursuant to the directive of the President, and those engaging in hoarding, profiteering, injuries, speculations, manipulation of prices, product and assumptions, and cartels, monopolies or other combinations, in restraint of trade or other pernicious practices affecting the supply, distribution, and movement of food, clothing, hygiene and sanitation products, medicine and medical supplies, fuel, fertilizers, chemicals, building materials, implements, machinery equipment, and spare parts required in agriculture, industry, and other essential services, and other articles of prime necessity, whether imported or locally produced or manufactured. And refusal to prioritize and accept contracts for materials and services necessary to promote the herein declared national policy, and refusal to provide 30-day grace period provided under Section 4, and individuals or groups creating, perpetrating, or spreading false informations regarding the COVID-19 crisis on social media and other platforms, and failure to comply with reasonable limitations on the operations of a certain transportation sectors, or whether land, sea, or air, be it private or public, and impeding access to roads, streets, and bridges, putting up prohibited encroachments or obstacles, and maintenance of illegal constructions in public places that have been ordered to be removed. Provided, however, that if the offender is a corporation, association, partnership, or any other juridical person, the penalty shall be imposed upon the president, directors, managers, managing partners, as the case may be, who participated in the commission of the offense, or who shall have knowingly permitted or failed to prevent the commission of the same. If the offender is an alien, he shall, in addition to the penalties herein prescribed, be deported without further proceedings. Provided further that if the offender is a public official or employee, he shall, in addition to the penalties prescribed herein, suffer perpetual or temporary absolute disqualification from office as the case may be. The second report is about Republic Act number 11494, also known as Bayanihan to Recover as One Act. An act providing for COVID-19 response and recovery interventions and providing mechanisms to accelerate the recovery and bolster the resiliency of the Philippine economy, providing funds therefore and for other purpose. According to Harry Roque, the presidential spokesperson, we consider the Bayanihan 2 crucial in our efforts to gradually reopen the economy, support businesses, and revitalize growth as we make our country resilient to COVID-19 by strengthening our health sector, particularly our healthcare capacity and pandemic response. Workers' benefits under this act. The Bayanihan 1, it is still the same that in provision of compensation to public and private health workers who have contracted COVID-19 in the line of duty with the following amounts upon submission of required documents to support claims. In case of death of the health worker, 1 million pesos shall be provided to the heirs of the health workers, and in case of sickness for a severe or critical case, 100,000 pesos shall be provided to the health workers. But in Bayanihan 2, it is added that in case of sickness for mild or moderate case, 15,000 pesos shall be provided to the health workers. Provided further that the compensation provided herein shall be exempt from the applicable taxes under the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended, provided finally that the compensation provided herein shall be given to the beneficiaries not later than 3 months after the date of confinement or death. For general public benefits under this act, it is still the same that in Bayanihan 1, an emergency subsidy of 5,000 pesos to 8,000 pesos to affected low-income household in areas under community quarantine or granular lockdown. But in Bayanihan 2, it is added to provided further that the subsidy received from the current conditional cash transfer program and rice subsidy shall taken into consideration in the computation of the emergency subsidy as provided for in this act. Provided furthermore that the vetting and validation of beneficiaries of the social amelioration program and the related liquidation report thereto shall be simplified to expedite the distribution of the subsidy. Provided, finally, that a definite and actual list of beneficiaries of this act shall be submitted to Congress. The next one is, it is still in the Bayanihan 2 that ensuring the availability of credit to the productive sectors of the economy, especially in the countryside, through measures such as but not limited to lowering the effective lending rates of interest and reserve requirements of lending institution. But in Bayanihan 2, they added that the credit accommodation to micro, small, and medium enterprises and cooperatives, as well as those who are self-employed, shall be imposed in low interest, payable within 3 years, and shall not require any collateral if the loan does not exceed 3 million pesos. For transportation industry, directing the Department of Transportation and such other agencies or instrumentalities that may be authorized under this act to extend the following assistance to critically impacted businesses in the transportation industry, including cooperatives. First is to provide direct cash or loan interest rate subsidy. Second is provide grants for applicable regulatory fees and allow substitution of refund option to travel vouchers. Provide grants for fuel subsidy and or digital fare vouchers as may be necessary, and provide grants for training, equipment, facilities, test kits, and necessary personnel on coping with increased health risks arising from infectious diseases. Within 15 days from the effectivity of this act, the Department of Transportation or any of its instrumentalities shall prescribe the eligibility requirements and other terms and conditions for any of the above-mentioned assistance subject to the guidelines issued under this subsection. 3. Directing the Department of Tourism to assist critically impacted businesses that are tourism enterprises, including tourism-oriented barangay micro-business enterprises, cooperatives engaged in tourism-related activities, or other members of the informal sector in the tourism economy in any of the following programs. First, provide loan interest rate subsidy. Second is Tourism Road Infrastructure Program of the DPWH and Cash for Work programs and unemployment and involuntary assistance for the displaced workers or employees in the tourism sector, and marketing and production development, promotions and programs including travel advertising and festival support strategies, grants for education, training, and advising of tourism stakeholders for the new normal alternative livelihoods programs, and in partnership with the local government unit and Department of Health and or private entities, establish COVID-19 testing centers in tourist destinations as identified by the Department of Tourism to stimulate tourism and generate employment. Any of the relevant programs including infrastructure, product sourcing, and subsidized domestic package tours necessary to mitigate the economic effects of COVID-19 on tourism industry. The purpose of item 1 herein, the SB Corp under its COVID-19 assistance to restart enterprises or CARES program shall administer the loans for DOT but subject to guidelines from the DOT that shall be prepared for these purposes, provided that the loan interventions implemented under this section shall be exclusively for accredited tourism enterprises, including such small-scale tourism-oriented enterprises accredited by LGUs under the Republic Act No. 9178 or the Barangay Micro Business Enterprises Act of 2002. Availment of grants, loans, or loan guarantees through other provision of this act is not a disqualification for any tourism enterprise to avail of any economic relief measures in this section. Corporate Internet and Communication Service Providers undertaking measures in partnership with appropriate Internet and Communication Service Providers in the acceleration of the deployment of critical information and communications technology infrastructure, particularly in additional cell towers, equipment, software, and wireless technologies throughout the country to address the need of digital connectivity, internet speed and stability, and cybersecurity in e-commerce, e-government, online learning, and telecommunicating in order to sufficiently meet the significant additional shift of the general public to online services and platforms and to home and mobile communication units for doing work from home for completing commercial and other transactions, for convening meetings and conducting conferences and seminars or webinars, and for obtaining educational instruction during the COVID-19 pandemic through the Department of Information and Communications Technology. Such measures shall include the following. First is the temporary suspension of requirements to secure permits and clearances for the construction of telecommunications and internet infrastructure, and the streamlining of regulatory process and procedures for the development and improvement of digital internet and satellite technology infrastructure, provided that the advantages of temporary suspension of requirements and streamlining of regulatory processes shall also apply to other value-added service providers and internet service providers in the establishments and operation of necessary equipment and facilities, and use of necessary technologies in order to expand the coverage of broadband internet networks and provide connectivity to unserved and underserved communities. No court except the Supreme Court shall issue any temporary restraining order, preliminary injunction, or preliminary mandatory injunction against the construction of telecommunication infrastructure, including cell sites and cell towers. Loans direct the Small Business Corporation to expand its existing loan programs for MSMEs, cooperatives, hospitals, tourism, and OFWs affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and by other socio-economic reversals through a combination of increasing available loanable funds, reducing documentary requirements, increasing maximum loan amounts per borrower, and reducing interest rates, extending loan terms, utilization of financial technologies to expand reach and increase access and set fast turnaround loan processing time, and allow the use of loan proceeds for payroll costs, materials and suppliers, mortgage payments, rent, utilities including fuel and storage, creation of new supportive businesses, repurposing of existing business capital, and any other business debt obligations that were incurred before the covered period, or acquisition of new technologies and systems to adjust business processes for resiliency. Direct the Land Bank of the Philippines and the DBP to introduce a low-interest loan and/or flexible term loan program for operating expenses available to businesses affected by COVID-19 pandemic. And another one is direct the Philippine Guarantee Corporations to issue an expanded government guarantee program for non-essential businesses to ease current rules and regulations and give preferences to critically impacted businesses, MSMEs, and activities that support Department of Health initiatives towards ensuring an adequate and responsive supply of healthcare services, and to guarantee the loan portfolio of partner financial institutions of eligible MSME and cooperative loans. Next, and provision of extension support, financial subsidies or loan interest rate subsidy, or other forms of assistance to qualified agri-fishery enterprises, farmers, fisherfolk, and other agricultural workers by the Department of Agriculture. All banks, quasi-banks, financing companies, lending companies, real estate developers, insurance companies providing life insurance policies, pre-need companies, entities providing in-house financing for goods and properties purchased, asset and liabilities management, companies and other financial institutions, public and private, including the GSIS, the SSS, and Pag-ibig Fund, are mandated to provide a one-time 60-day grace period for the payment of existing, current, and outstanding loans falling due or any part thereof on or before December 31, 2020, thereby extending the maturity of the said loans. Cooperatives are not allowed to impose interest on interest, penalties, fees, or other charges to future payments or amortizations of the member borrower arising from the implementation of the one-time 60-day grace period. Any accrued interest earned during the one-time 60-day grace period may be paid by the member borrower on a staggered basis until December 31, 2020, or as may be agreed upon by both parties. And lastly, under the provision of law, the parties may mutually agree to extend the mandatory grace period of 60 days. Institutions providing electric, water, telecommunications, and other similar utilities to implement a minimum of 30-day grace period for the payment of utilities falling due within the period of ECQ or MECQ without incurring interest, penalties, and other charges, provided that after the grace period, unpaid residential, MSME, and cooperatives utility bills may be settled on a staggered basis payable in not less than 3 monthly installments, subject to the procedural requirements of the concerned regulatory agencies in the imposition of such installment plan without interest, penalties, and other charges. Order that covered institutions under the subsection may offer less onerous payment terms with the consent of their clients, subject to the approval of their respective regulators, provided furthermore that in case of the electric power sector, the minimum 30-day grace period and staggered payment without interest, penalties, and other charges shall apply to all payments due within the period of the ECQ or MECQ in the entire electric power value chain, to include generation companies, the transmission utility, and distribution utilities. Residential leases. This act provides residential leases and businesses that cease operations as a result of a declared community quarantine are given a 30-day grace period from the lifting of quarantine within which to pay rents falling due during the quarantine. The total may be paid on staggered basis up to December 31, 2020. Rental rates may not be increased during this period. Temporary powers given to the President under this Act, the liberalization of the grant of incentives for the manufacture or importation of critical or needed equipment or supplies or essential goods for the carrying out of the policy declared herein, including healthcare equipment and supplies, provided that the exemption from import duties, taxes, and other fees for manufacture or importation of critical equipment or essential goods shall be determined by the Bureau of Customs and Bureau of Internal Revenues, respectively, provided further that limitations and restrictions to the sale, distribution, and trade of the foregoing goods, equipment, or supplies may be imposed to prevent shortage of supply and to ensure that the prices thereof remain reasonable, giving priority and preferences to the needs and safety of health workers and frontliners. Temporarily require businesses to prioritize and accept contracts for materials and services necessary in the fight against COVID-19 subject to fair and reasonable terms. The President can also regulate and limit the operation of all transportation, land, sea, and air, whether private or public, in a manner that will allow the government to address the COVID-19 health emergency. DTI, in coordination with other implementing agencies, to accelerate and undertake massive promotion of online commerce and offer technical and financial assistance through GFIS to those engaged in e-commerce, such as those involved in internet retail, digital financial services, digital media, and ride-hailing. These include programs that will expedite the digitalization of MSMEs through training, subsidies for onboarding or starter kits, wage support for new online enterprises, upscaling or rescaling, and other activities as may be defined by the DTI, DICT, TESDA, and CHED. Another one is that this act also provides the conservation and regulation of the distribution and use of power, fuel, energy, and to ensure adequate supply of the same. This act also encouraged the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas to allow private banks and financial institutions to reallocate any unutilized loanable funds to housing loans and to grant subsidy to home loan borrowers at the rate equivalent to the gross receipt tax imposed on banks and financial institutions on their interest income. And encouraging Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas and the Security Exchange Commission to adopt measures including the relaxation of regulatory and statutory restrictions and requirements for a period of not more than 1 year from their day of effectivity. To encourage the banking industry and other financial institutions to extend loans and other forms of financial accommodation to help business recover from the economic effects of the COVID-19 crisis and to enable the banking industry to manage appropriately its risk and potential losses. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas and the SEC are likewise hereby authorized to grant reporting relief to its supervised entities by allowing staggered booking of allowance for credit losses for all types of credit accommodations extended to individuals and business entities affected by COVID-19. Act also provide the issuance of a directive that all government agencies and local government units shall act on all pending and due applications for permit, license, certificate, clearance, authorization, and resolutions within a non-extendable period of 5 working days in order to support business continuity and encourage resumption of all economic activities, provided that the applicant shall be allowed to undertake its compliance to any additional requirement that may be imposed by the government, agency, or LGU, and such will not delay the approval of the application. Provided, finally, that the Philippine Competition Commission, or PCC, shall promote business continuity and capacity building. As such, all mergers and acquisitions with transaction values below 50 billion pesos shall be exempt from compulsory notification under the Section 17 of RA number 10667 or the Philippine Competition Act if entered into within a period of 2 years from the effectivity of this act. Also allow the national and local government agencies to directly purchase agricultural and fishery products from farmers and fisher folks as a form of direct assistance even beyond the lapse of Republic Act number 11469 in accordance with the Republic Act number 11321 or the Sagip-Saka Act. And also, this act provides that notwithstanding the provisions of existing laws to contrary, the net operating loss of the business or enterprise for taxable years 2020 and 2021 shall be carried over as a deduction from gross income for the next 5 consecutive taxable years immediately following the years of such loss, provided that this subsection shall remain in effect even after the expiration of this act. Fund. The amounts that will be raised under Section 4 of this act shall be used for the response and recovery interventions for the COVID-19 pandemic authorized in this act and the following: 13 billion for health-related responses, 3 billion for procurement of PPEs and other medical supplies, 4.5 billion for construction of isolation facilities, and 13 billion for cash for work for displaced workers, unemployment for involuntary separation, assistance for displaced workers, and more or less 39 billion for infusion of capital to GFIs, and 24 billion for direct cash or loan interest rate subsidies under programs of Department of Agriculture ACPC, and 9.5 billion for Department of Transportation programs, 100 million for finance the training and subsidies for tourist guidelines, 3 billion to assist SUCs in the development of smart campuses, and 600 million for subsidies to qualified students of public and private schools, 300 million for subsidies for displaced teachers and non-working personnel in both private and public schools, and 1 billion for additional scholarship funds of TESDA, and 6 billion pesos to finance the DSWD programs, and 4 billion to assist the DepEd in the implementation of digital education, information technology, and digital infrastructure and alternative learning modalities, including the printing and delivery of self-learning modules of the DepEd, and 1,500 million pesos as assistance to local government units under the Local Government Support Fund, and 180 million pesos to finance the allowances for national athletes and coaches whose allowances were reduced due to the pandemic, and 820 million for the augmentation of the Department of Foreign Affairs Office of the Migrant Workers Affairs 2020 assistance to national funds for repatriation-related expenses, shipment of remains and cremains of overseas Filipinos who passed away due to COVID-19, the medical assistance of overseas Filipinos, and other assistance that may be provided for them who are affected by the pandemic, and 4 billion pesos for the tourism industry, and 5 billion pesos subject to Section 4B hereof to finance the hiring of at least 50,000 contact tracers to be implemented by the DILG, which shall include but not limited to recruitment, training, compensation, monitoring, logistics, and operation expenses, and 4,500 million pesos for construction and maintenance of isolation facilities, including billing of hotels, food, and transportation to be used for the COVID-19 response and recovery program by the Office of Civil Defense as the head of the National Task Force against the COVID-19, and 2,500,000 pesos for Professional Regulation Commission, computer-based licensure examination, 2 billion pesos to subsidize the payment of interest on new and existing loans secured by the LGUs from LBP and DBP, and 10 million pesos for the HTAC Research Fund to provide for the commissioning of more COVID-19 research and enhance its internal capacity, and 15 million pesos for establishment of a computational research laboratory in the University of the Philippines Diliman Institute of Mathematics to process big data analysis for COVID-19 and other pandemic research. In addition, a standby fund in the amount of 25,527,500,000 pesos is hereby authorized and shall be made available once the additional funds are generated from savings and unused amounts to fund the other existing programs. Section 18, the effectivity, except as otherwise specifically provided herein, this act shall be in full force and effect until the next adjournment of the 18th Congress on December 19, 2020. This act shall take effect immediately upon its publication in a newspaper of general circulation or in the official gazette, provided that Section 4, Paragraph CC of this act shall be deemed to be in effect since Republic Act number 11469 expired. To share or give a friendly reminder to everyone that we, the Filipino citizen, must have discipline within ourselves. The government serve as the regulator of all the rules and regulations to mitigate and maintain the spread of the coronavirus and to fight this pandemic for us. As the government helps us, serves us, we need to give back to the government the services that they give us by following the rules and regulations, the pharmaceutical preventions being implemented by the government. Because at the end of the day, our safety or the safety of the Filipino people depends on the behavior of each and everyone collectively. So that's all. Thank you.